time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. In spite of recent agitations accompanied by permutations of alleged moves by President Bola Tinubu to drop Vice President Kashim Shettima as his running mate in 2027, this day weekend gathered that the president is unlikely to change his deputy in his bid for re-election. A reliable Villa source who dismissed swirling reports about the fate of Shettima as hanging in the balance ahead of the 2027 elections told this day that the speculations or rumors were unfounded because Tinubu never had such discussions with anyone. To close his argument, the source, widely known in government circles as a man of few words, said with confidence, and I quote, "The president will run with Shettima. You can file it away. Stop worrying about the rumor. He will." End of quote. To further establish his arguments, the source who allayed concerns about the place of the ruling party in the 2027 elections added, "We, the APC, are winning the next election, is all I know. Wallahi." End of quote. There had been speculations that in navigating a winning strategy for his 2027 re-election bid, Tinubu might have considered the possibility of dropping Shettima as his running mate. Now let's move over to Rivers State. As the end of the emergency rule declared by President Bola Tinubu draws nearer, the sole administrator of Rivers State, Vice Admiral Ibas, appealed to Rivers people, especially the politicians, to sheathe the sword, rise above bitterness, rivalry, and self-interest to pursue the greater good of the state. The administrator made the appeal yesterday during an interdenominational church Thanksgiving service held at the Ecumenical Center in Port Harcourt ahead of transition from office. However, the opposition parties called for an investigation into Ibas' tenure, particularly his management of the state's resources during his 6-month stay in Brick House.
Survived storms, political, social, economic, and through it all, God has been faithful. The seeds of reconciliation have been planted. These seeds need your deliberate nurture to take roots. Our collective sacrifices and commitment to peace is what we must all strive to guide at this time. Rivers people must rise above bitterness, rivalry, and self-interest to pursue the greater good of our state. The progress and prosperity of Rivers State must be placed above personal and/or partisan interest. I make a special appeal to our political actors: shade the sword. Politics must never be an excuse to destroy the very state we are called to serve. Rivers State cannot afford another season of division and agreement. To our youth, you are the strength of Rivers State. Do not allow yourselves to be used as tools for violence.
God wants us to forget the past. He wants us to forget the past and seek a better Rivers State. Beloved brethren, we may have hurt each other, either by words or our actions, but we must learn to forgive. The second thing he demands from us is that we join us together to move Rivers State forward.
And let's go now to oil and gas. Nigeria's ambition of achieving self-sufficiency in fuel production and fully harnessing the gains of local oil refining continues to hang by a thread, as both the importation of crude oil and refined petroleum products continue to soar concurrently in the first half of this year. According to the NBS data, the country spent 2.3 trillion naira on petrol imports in Q2 2025 as against 1.76 trillion naira recorded in Q1 this year, bringing the half-year total spending on importation of the product to about 4.06 trillion naira. During Q2, petrol was among the top 5 most imported commodities nationwide, followed by durum wheat, gas oil, crude petroleum oils, and cane sugar for refineries, the data showed. Nigeria has struggled to supply crude oil consistently to the Dangote refinery, largely due to production constraints and market dynamics. Persistence on the production has left the country unable to meet both export obligations and domestic refinery demand. The Dangote refinery in the first 6 months of 2025, spanning January to June, imported an estimated 60 million barrels of crude oil from various parts of the world. All right, it's a lovely week and we're beginning of a new week. Maybe I'm speaking prophetically ahead of the week.
Amen.
But Vimbai, great to see you on the show this morning.
It's great
and from daybreak to the morning show. I want to ask you, of course, we have a few stories and of course Rufai.
Yeah.
A few conversations this morning, starting off with the River State sole administrator. In 3 days' time, he's going to be exiting and hopefully handing back power to the elected governor of the state. And then APC actually in the news this morning with the president and speculations around whether or not he's going to ditch Shetima as his vice president. And finally, we've been talking about this all week last week. This fuel and Dangote refinery in the news, particularly with some of the Truck Drivers Association. Your take on these stories?
Yeah, I mean, three very massive issues, but let's see where we can begin. I think it's apt for us to begin with the fact that today is International Democracy Day, and this is a day that was conceived by the United Nations General Assembly in 2007. Why do I begin there? Because when we look at what's currently happening in River State, we now begin to ask ourselves and reflect on what is the state, what is the health of our democracy? I think it's cheery and also a little bit of concerning news as we count down to September 18th, where it now seems to be widely confirmed that Governor Siminalayi Fubara will be returning to his rightful seat. But in the meantime, of course, we can't blame the sole administrator, Ibas, and his wife for doing a Thanksgiving and for singing and praising in church, because I mean, they were minding their business when they were selected to come and take on this massive duty. But what is most important at the moment? What is the process of the handover? What will that look like? We understand that Ibokete Ibas has done handover notes to the president. However, what we're looking for is his day before the National Assembly, because we know under him, we've seen the appointment of commissioners. We've seen which many people are saying that, of course, that was partisan, highly partisan. We've seen the conduct of local government elections that many are saying, well, even with that, because we know that all of the seats were pre-selected and there were no opposing candidates in any of those seats. So it was not an election in essence. We've seen him create a new budget, or rather edit the former budget that existed. And most of this has been in accountability with an accountability line, with the National Assembly. So what we anticipate now is his day before the National Assembly, where he will give account for the past 6 months that he has been at the helm of River State. And we also look to see a smooth transition. Now, without dismissing the messenger, I think his message was apt in that he was preaching peace, reconciliation, unity. He preached against violence and so forth. His message itself was important and significant at this time, because we all do need to continue to advocate for peace within River State, no matter what the politics of the day says. However, having said this, it's important to continue to advocate for the fact that we should not, and we do not intend to see another instance where our democracy is challenged again by such an occurrence in any part of Nigeria. I'll now quickly go to the state of affairs in our economy, as, again, it's a paradox. When we see the news that Dangote Refinery has had to import over 60 million barrels of crude oil into a crude producing nation, and this is coming just a few weeks after we've just celebrated an increase in our crude production in comparison to past years. So for the 60 million barrels that Dangote has done in the past 6 months, Nigeria has produced 266.9 million barrels in that period. But here's where the first paradox occurs. even with that increase in our year-on-year production from previous years, we've seen a decline of 3 trillion naira in the income. What is that? We're seeing global shocks. Oil has been highly volatile in the first half of this year. We're seeing high production costs, notorious for the Nigerian oil production sector. And then we're also seeing domestic absorption. However, on the issue of domestic absorption and those who are using this oil locally, we can see that the crude for naira deal is actually making quite a significant impact when it comes to a decline in revenue, but it's not making enough of an impact when it comes to supplying crude oil to Dangote. Now, if I'm to turn away from the downside and look at the positives, one of the things that we do see from the fact that Dangote is absorbing some of the crude oil is that from our export numbers, crude oil has gone from just over 70% of exports and has now come down to about 50% of our total export basket. So what does that mean? It means that slowly but surely we're starting to see a gradual diversification of our export to the rest of the world. This is very important because I also looked at the first page of this day today that celebrates the fact that the chairman of Union Bank, that's Mr. Farouk Gumal, has just been appointed the chairperson of Botswana's new National Sovereign Wealth Fund. And that Sovereign Wealth Fund is created to diversify away from being a monoproduct economy. So the shocks happening in the oil sector, as much as they are hitting us, because we know the heavy reliance that we still have, whether it be from our fiscal, whether it be from our economic stability. However, it's now a time for us to say, what is the intentionality that we're creating around evolving out of the monoproduct economy in the same way that Botswana is now creating this National Sovereign Wealth Fund, where they're saying that, okay, the diamonds are no longer working for us, but we're now going to create a fund that is led by international experts, each coming in to steer the economy into a more robust and an economy that will be able to endure more of the global shocks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Wimbai. Rufai, your take on these stories?
So a couple of things. As today is being celebrated, like you said, Wimbai, it's International Democracy Day. We are not practicing democracy here. We're practicing a demonstration of grace and madness. And I'll tell you why. Where is the democracy where two people had an agreement in private about how they will run the states, and their matters are being settled, and it's taken up to the presidency, and the presidency sides with one part to the detriment of the entire state? Where is that democracy happening? Nigeria. Where is the democracy happening? Where you have a case of a state of emergency and you remove the governor and you suspend democratically elected officials in the state just because you want to hold the hand of everybody and conduct a funny local government election that would tilt the power in favor of Mr. Wike. That happens in Nigeria. Where is the democracy where the Supreme Court ought to stand strong? And you were on this table, Ayo. Vemba, I think you were on this table too. The day I openly challenged the Supreme Court here, and these were my words, it would be a miracle if they could hear the case brought by the 11 state governors against the state of emergency, which will have been an important determinant point of our democracy in this country. But I was correct, and I won the challenge against the Supreme Court of Nigeria. I was right. They didn't hear the case, and they would not hear it. And that's what they've always done in this country, because they know if they hear the case, like Dr. Abati will say, there will be implications. So they didn't hear it. They waited for the case to peter out till the end. And today, Ibas is going to church. How will he not go to church to do Thanksgiving? You called him in to come and stroll and enjoy a position free of no charge. You gave him the best day of his life in his retirement. How will he go and do Thanksgiving? That's the reflection of the democracy that we practice in this country. And as that continues, nothing will work. And please, for the judiciary, do well. You see, the fight against the military was a whole lot easier because we had radical people in the judiciary that stood for justice. Today, we can't say the same. The same judiciary that was quick to hear Wike and his associates' case when they brought the case against the local government election, given the 90-day quota, that was quick to hear that case last year, is the same judiciary that is mute today as regards a case of state of emergency. I know they will give excuses. They will say we went on recess and all of that, we went on break. So how will Ibas not celebrate? And the truth is, no accountability will be done. Nobody will hear accountability out. We were all seated here. How the budget was increased. The same budget that was a struggle that they said Fubara could not pass because 4 people passed, it was an aberration. That's the same budget a man with the state of emergency passed and utilized. And we had local government elections. So, with due respect, as far as I'm concerned, this is not a democracy we are celebrating. This is a demonstration of grace. And it shocks me the most that the people that were loudest against the military are the ones running the democracy today. They are the ones in charge. We remember the role they played in the military. I go talk them. Secondly, it's the same aberration that goes on in this country that leads to the madness that's going on in our oil sector. At first, we said, oh, what was the problem? We should have local refineries. NNPC took us on a merry-go-round. They claimed that they pumped in 3 billion. They claimed at first that the refineries were working, despite the fact that we told them the refineries were not working. What happened? It turned out they were not working. Do you know that part of the imports that is going on, do you know that as of January, NNPC still imported petrol into this country with other marketers? Is that supposed to be the case where in a refinery that NNPC owns shares, the Dangote refinery, didn't we see in this country how NNPC reduced the amount they were supposed to pay completely for the Dangote refinery because interests to them matter? The same Dangote refinery that they said, okay, we will make crude available for, but they can't make crude available. That's why Dangote is going to import crude. Importing crude is not an aberration, taking the same forex we claim we don't have away. So the same argument that we make, that we spend about 15 trillion in forex to import crude every year when we had no refinery, are we not almost spending the same amount because some marketers feel the game will not favor them, so they will import substandard fuel into the system and sell here? Under NNPC's tenure in 2022, did we import fuel that had high methane content that was knocking engines in this country? Did NNPC pay compensation? No. So that's the aberration that continues. And how are they going to give Dangote crude oil in the crude for swap deal? Because you have a country that has sold most of its crude in forward sale. Operation Gazelle, we remember that. Many other operations to sell our crude in forward sale. So where is the crude available? Because most of the crude, as you churn out the crude, despite the high cost of production of the crude, and despite the fact that I hear the numbers has also reduced of what we are producing, as you churn out the crude, what does it go to? We have already used it to borrow BC all this while. So that's the country we live in. And in all of this, what are the marketers still doing? They think Dangote is permanent, so they are fighting him. They are still importing crude. They are fighting him again because he says he wants to be able to transport his crude through tankers that he went to take money, probably a loan, to get close to $1 trillion, over 7 billion. They say is the problem. So that's the aberration that Nigeria has been. Ayo, ask me, how will the NNPC that claimed they spent 3 billion to fix a refinery is still importing refined crude into this country as of January this year?
All right, okay, let me just touch on very quickly, since you've ended with the Dangote story, and that is that Dangote Refinery has consistently said that they're able to meet Nigeria's local need in terms of PMS. But what they need is feedstock of crude, particularly from the NNPC. Unfortunately, despite how it started a bit well at the beginning, they have not been able to meet their obligations, hence the numbers we see this morning. And like you mentioned, Rufai, our much needed forex is used to import when we have the material here, we have the crude here in Nigeria, and we also have the capacity to not just meet local needs, but also be able to export abroad through the Dangote Refinery and others who have stepped into the market as well to be a part of this. Now, one of the things that was mentioned or has been mentioned is underproduction. This is a conversation we've been having for so long, and one of the remits that's been given to the NNPC by the president, and that is to increase production because, like you said, a huge part of that crude has already been put for forward sales for debt in being able to get loan. The most important thing we must talk about is why is NNPC unable to meet the needs of Dangote Refinery, at least to support local requirements? That is a big question for them. They did quite well in the early part of this year with their targets for hitting 2 million barrels per day. Unfortunately, they've not been able to meet it. So there are questions to be asked. There are questions to be asked, especially when we have an indigenous organization, an indigenous factory willing to refine the oil and prevent us to reduce and totally, if possible, eliminate any type of importation of crude. This then brings up a bigger conversation to what we were speaking about last week, and that's why I brought it on. Perhaps this talk about a deliberate sabotage because of some of the interests of persons involved, hence this consistent attack, whether it's through the truck drivers, whether it's through accusations of quality of products coming out of the refinery or whatever, because some people's interests who have depended on arbitrage based on importation is being affected. And so we must not allow this corruption that has continued for so long in this sector to keep on going. And that's why, for me this morning, the big question will go to the NNPC as to why is it difficult for us? They've talked about how security, security alerts and our pipelines being vandalized have been reduced significantly as a result of investment made both by the security operatives and the investments in terms of the monies that have been paid to private security organizations. So why is it being difficult to increase our daily production? I know there must be an answer to that, and that's why I challenged NNPC this morning. We shouldn't still be importing crude oil. I recognize the international shocks and all that, but Nigeria has the capacity to produce enough stock to feed Dangote to meet the needs of our local PMS requirements. Now, let me talk some politics this morning, and that's the first story around the APC. Of course, this story started swirling around since June of this year, June 2025, when the APC Northeast stakeholders met in Gombe State. Recall the outcome of that particular meeting when, as Mustafa Salihu, the vice chairman of the APC in the Northeast, had announced the endorsement as sole candidate for the APC in the 2027 elections, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, without obviously endorsing his vice, who is Senator Kashim Shettima, who is from that region, the Northeast. They were in the Northeast, and in fact, some of the attendees had said that it was an insult to the region to not mention their son as returning alongside on the same ticket as the president. Now, this was followed by Ganduje, the chairman at the time of the APC, who also did not mention expressively Kashim Shettima as a candidate on the ticket, just endorsed President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And of course, then conversations started coming out around whether or not Senator Kashim Shettima will be proceeding with the president come 2027 elections. There were a number of permutations, as the words I used earlier on, around, okay, would this happen? Who would then replace him? Some even had touted perhaps the Northwest being the main harvest of votes for the president during the last elections and even in the next elections, and maybe someone from that side. Well, there were also talks around perhaps the Muslim ticket being very divisive, and so moving on now to maybe a Christian deputy from the North. There were conversations around even a North Central candidate emerging. Some names had even come into the ring that who would give the president political value as much as Senator Kashim Shettima? Would it be Senator Rabiu Musa Kakonso with his, with his movement? Would it be Nuhu Ribadu? Would it be even the former Gombe governor? Would it be Hadiza Bala Usman? Maybe we'd have our first female vice president in Nigeria. Unfortunately, or this was thrown into the ring. Now, what we've now heard from a reliable source, according to This Day Weekend, is that let's perish that thought. It's not going to happen. Senator Kashim Shettima is coming back for the next term. What does this mean for the for the next elections? It means, well, number one, some stability. At least we've seen what these two candidates have done, or these two individuals have done, leading and steering the affairs of the country in the last 2 years and plus 4 years by 2027. And then also, we also might also perish the thought of a northern Christian, a Muslim Christian ticket come 2027. It also takes away the division of votes in the Northeast, because recall that some of them said if he's removed, they would back fully Atiku Abubakar, who now looks like he's going to be running as again come 2027. So maybe some stability in the APC and resting some divisions that would have occurred if the president had gone ahead to take out Kashim Shettima in the next election. But we'll keep watching. These are still speculations. These are still reliable sources coming up to speak. At the end of the day, until we see the names on the ballots, we cannot yet say it is full stop for the decision of the APC. We continue to watch ahead of 2027. Let's see what pans out and how it would affect the APC, bearing in mind that they now have key opposition, not just from the PDP, the emerging AGC, and of course, let's not forget the Labour Party as well in the mix of things.